Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gomali. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today we had a sensational upset in the European Club Cup, which is currently taking place in Rhodes in Greece, and round one today. And in the European Women's Club Cup, Bodhana Sivanandan from North London managed to defeat a former women's chess champion in Mariya Muzychuk from the Ukraine. And I first heard about Bodhana. I was playing in a rapid play before the British Championships in Turkey. I think it was in 2022, right? And so traditionally there's a rapid play before the actual tournament takes place. And I remember this girl was on sort of high boards and people were talking about her. And in one of the rounds, I think I was on one of the top boards, and Keith was playing her. And her dad came up and he started taking photographs. He was, going a bit crazy because he never played against GM before, right? And I'm like, who's this idiot, right? You get away from the, who's this guy? Because you hear about these juniors all the time. And then you're like, well, they never really amount to much, right? So I was sort of like, give us a bit of space, mate. Do you know what I mean? Like, about to start the game, Obviously, he's very excited because Bodhana never played against. I later got to know her dad. Siv, a lovely guy, right? And but it was quite funny at the time. I didn't really know who he was. I didn't know who his daughter was. But then when I thought about it later, I thought, well, hang on a minute. She's 7. I think she's about 6 or 7 at the time. So he's one of these COVID kids who picked up chess over the COVID lockdown. It's pretty impressive to be playing on such a high board. And obviously since then, she's made relentless progress. He recently beat a GM in Peter Wells at the British Championships in Liverpool. And now she's defeated another GM. And also a former women's world chess champion. Now, bear in mind, Bodhana's only 10. So, Mariya Muzychuk, I'm not sure how old she is, but she would be kind of in her prime, right? And when she won the Women's World Championship, I believe that was something like 2015. Looked this up earlier. She got the GM title. So, she's also a GM. She got her GM title when she won the Women's World Championships, which was a knockout event. She beat Poganina in the final, Natalia Poganina from Russia, who is herself like a like a strong player as well. I used to write for Natalia's website. I used to write for her blog. Anyway, we're going to have a look at this Bodhana game. So it's quite interesting. So Bodhana's white. She plays e4. And then bishop b5 check. So this line where they play, this is called a Moscow variation. I believe if black goes knight c6 and white goes bishop b5. I believe that's called the Rosalimo, a variation. It's named after Nicholas Rosalimo, who's a chess player as well, unsurprisingly, right? But I think he was like back in the day, it was one of the old style chess gangsters, old school. But it's interesting now that the engines say that bishop b5 is slightly better than d4. That's why at top level, d4 has become less popular. But bishop b5 after d6 is also quite a decent variation. Michael Adams, for example, uses quite a lot. This is one of Bodhana's weapons. It's used it quite effectively. It's quite a difficult variation. If you're black and you're trying to win the game, it's quite difficult to win the game. You kind of get this groan. When I play now, 90% of my games are like c3 Sicilians or bishop b5 checks when I play Sicilian. You don't play Sicilian, you don't get an open Sicilian, which is why you play the Sicilian in the first place. So bishop b5 check. Bishop d7 is considered the most solid variation, but black went knight d7. This is old favourite of Garry Kasparov's. The idea is if you take, you're not going to get the bishop pair. Knight d7, interesting move. Bodhana castled, and a6 was played. So so you can play bishop d3. I think that is a variation as well. But Bodhana played bishop takes d7, so this is quite happy to give up the bishop pair. So I think Bodhana's style is quite solid. She's quite a solid player. She doesn't make big mistakes. You know, she plays quite straightforward, simplistic chess in some ways. A little bit like Bobby Fischer, right, back in the day. Another old school, you know, gangster player. Yeah, I think she's also a very ambitious player, like Bobby Fischer, because he also talked about how she wants to be world champion when she's a teenager. She wanted to become the first teenage world chess champion. Well, Gukesh got there first, but there's still time. Knight f6 was played by black. Bishop g5, e6. And now knight bd2. And the point is, yeah, knight bd2, very solid move. So again, you know, very solid player. She just wants to go maybe knight c4, put a bit of pressure on d6. So bishop c6 played, then knight c4. Quite an aggressive move actually, because you know you're weak in e4, but of course black can't exploit that. Black could play h6 actually, but I think the problem with h6 maybe for tactical reasons, if you take out the queen, is knight d6 is maybe. Again, I haven't analysed this game properly. I did look at it briefly with a computer. Look at some of the computer lines, you know, with the engine on, but you know I haven't analysed this game properly, so it's probably garbage analysis as usual from me. So maybe h6 was a move that black could have considered, actually. There's also some, yeah, there's also some ideas of maybe going knight b6 or taking on, but then, yeah, black would get the bishop pair in the endgame. You know, because knight b6, you're going to have to move the rook. But she decided to go bishop e7, which, yeah, is fairly straightforward. And now she took on f6. And then black took out the pawn. It's a little bit like a famous game, Ivanchuk Kasparov from Linares 1991, where Ivanchuk had the queen and two knights against Kasparov's queen and bishop pair. And I think that was also from a bishop b5 Czech Sicilian. So again, I don't know how much these players were aware of that during the game, or if they're aware of this game at all. But that was quite a famous game, actually. And of course, Ivanchuk is famously Ukrainian, like Muzychuk. Also, Muzychuk's sister, also a very strong player, Anna Muzychuk. So, rook ad1, b5. So, you know, your first thought is, why aren't you taking the pawn? Well, actually, that would be a mistake, because that's too much of a bailout. And now, I think black, even though you got the double pawns there as black, your bishop extreme, you know, you got double pawn e6, f7, that's a very solid structure, which is going to be very difficult for white to break down. Bishop becomes very active. This is actually the sort of position that Muzychuk's probably aiming for. So he thinks he can outplay Bodhana in the endgame, like c3, or maybe the rook might you know, end up in trouble after bishop d5, or you could also take on f3, give white a bad structure, play king e7 is probably going to be the most likely move, right? So, obviously, Bodhana rejected that. It's absolutely right to keep the tension. Rook g8, king h1. Very patient move. Quite a nice move there from Bodhana. Queen c7, rook fe1. Now, this is where black started to lose the thread of the game a little bit. And, yeah, this is where there was actually a good move here for black and would have given her a slight advantage. But not obvious, actually, because it looks like a weakening move. When you first, it's a very typical idea when you've got the double pawns and you've got the bishop pair. So what do bishop pair want? You know, they like space, they like targets, right? You know, that bishop is on that diagonal, but it's blocked by the pawn. So the best move for black would have been f5. This is what I saw when I checked with the engine earlier. It was saying that f5 was the move. Which again, you know, from a novice perspective, you think, well, surely white would just take. And then you got a very bad position. If you go e5, yeah, I mean, you could play e5, but then I'm going to have this clamp on d5. Clearly you can't take because the knight takes. But I think this is what the computer wanted. It wanted to go f5. And maybe here it wants to go again. You know, I didn't check this in any great detail. Maybe queen b7 is one idea. And then suddenly this becomes a big threat. Bishop takes f3, right? Yeah, I'm doing this video immediately after the game because I'm like one of these, you know, I'm trying to cash in on the success of Bodhana. I'm trying to ride her coattails. It's like a lot of these YouTubers, don't they? They do a video immediately after like a big result. So I'm just cynically trying to cash in. Queen B7. Yeah, so let's just imagine a variation like this. This could end up being a disaster for white. So she stepped out of that G file to avoid that kind of possibility, but black could have done it anyway. So obviously if your king was still on G1, that's partly why Bodhana played king H1, because he wants to be able to take. But in fact, after Queen B7, black is probably... What does the engine say here actually? Maybe you couldn't take in the first place. It's already clearly better for black. So after F5, yeah, you're already in a bit of trouble. Yeah, not good. So that's quite a big mistake by black. And now the game started to turn in Bodhana's favour. So he went to C4, B4. Apparently here you could actually play a move like knight D5, which is not obvious, but it's kind of on your radar because of the fact that, you know, knight D5 is such a thematic idea in the Sicilian. You know, when I remember I analysed going through a book, and it was really, you know, in the Sicilian, it really struck me how often in the Sicilian knight D5 was a strong idea, right? And if you take, I take back the pawn, and if you move the bishop, I go rook C1. Well, that's just very good for white. So apparently knight D5 was like a real huge shocker. Again, I think why Mariya castle queenside is probably a bit rusty. He probably hasn't played much, I'll be honest. You know, Bodhana plays a lot. I mean, I'm not making excuses for black, but he doesn't play very much, you know, and that's often a significant factor when you're trying to play high-level players. You know, so you may start to play a bit better in the coming rounds. So C4, B4. Yeah, so already very difficult position after C4, you know, practically speaking, because white is opening lines. C4 was a great move by Bodhana. You know, opening lines. So apparently after B4, A3 was not the best, but still dangerous for black because obviously you're opening lines, right? Practically you feel uncomfortable here. Because if you take on A3, probably just going to take back. I could consider maybe going B4. Maybe Bodhana's idea was just to go B4 actually, and then rook A1 or B5 is also. But even if you just take back, obviously then you've got this open B file to contend with, so that's another problem for black. So Queen B7, now Knight D2. Again, very solid move by Bodhana. You know, Knight D2 again. Maybe computer wanted to do something else. Maybe wanted Knight D5 again, but this is typical of her style because if you go F5, now she can play F3, for example. Maybe I don't know what the idea was, but I would assume that after F5, F3. You know, white's probably doing well. Not the only move, by the way. Maybe there were other moves. For example, even knight b3 might be a candidate move because of bishop e4 you have f3. Oh, it doesn't work because the bishop takes f3. Probably. So probably f3. You obviously don't take on f5 because of bishop g2 is a disaster. But probably f3. So b3. Now rook c1. So her clear threat is to go rook c3 and rook takes b3. And then if that happens, black is just in big trouble. So black played f5. Now a great move by Bodhana. And we mentioned this idea before. So now I think she realises that obviously you can't... Her idea wasn't to go f3 actually. Her idea was eventually, anyway, to go knight d5. And that's what she played. Which is kind of more obvious now the rook is on the c-file. Because obviously if you take, this is total disaster for black. Bishop g5 is played. And then rook c3. And I think when positions are simple, Bodhana is just as strong as anyone, you know. And it's kind of a simple position for white, you know, quite simple to play. It's just like you're attacking the black king. Black has a lot of weaknesses, and you just play natural attacking moves. And that's what she did. She went queen e3, threatened to take the pawn on b3. Bishop takes what else? You know, white is, much better now. You know, you're threatening rook b3. It doesn't seem obvious how you prevent that. Again, you know, if you take, then that's a disaster. So basically, and I think by this point, Mariya was also short of time. So king d7 was played, queen f4, king e8. Apparently the best move here was rook e4, which is not obvious. And the move that Bodhana played was more natural in a way, I would say. Rook e4. It feels like you're allowing queen d5, but apparently there's something... Why is queen d5 no good? Because now you're threatening queen d1, right? Why is that bad? Maybe just... No, hang on. I wanted to go rook e1, which wouldn't be a good move at all. Yeah, I'm kind of slightly puzzled as to why this is supposed to be so great for white. What was the engine saying here? Maybe rook c1's the move. And then queen g5. No, it's not. So queen f4, king e8. Oh, yeah, you take on e6. Yeah, so actually the moves he played wasn't the best. Yeah, you take here first. And then you go here. Because now queen d5, there's like... Maybe even rook e6 actually is winning. Queen e6, rook e3. And technically you're winning because black has too many weak pawns. But there's other moves like rook c3 probably is good. You know, we just wouldn't attack. If you can just attack without having to sacrifice material, that's really what you want to do in attacking positions. You don't want to have to sacrifice material if you can avoid it. You know, if you can just win without having to do anything special. Yeah, a lot of amateur players struggle because they just try to, you know, when they got attacking positions, you know, how do you even attack, right? So they think, well, I've got to sacrifice. You know, I've got to do a sacrifice because I've seen all these great games where people sacrifice. But really, most attacking positions are won without sacrificing. You know, you just won by the opponent collapsing. That's kind of what happened in the game. Queen e4, rook g6, queen f3. Black played rook b8. Rook c6 was played. Attacking the d6 pawn. So even though Bodhana gave away some of our advantage, queen e4, she now started to play really well. And e5, rook ec1 was a great move. Again, just simple chess. You're just threatening rook c7, which would win on the spot. So black's got to get desperate with king d8, hoping for maybe rook c7 and get into... That's the best you could hope for. This is probably better for white anyway, but that's better than what happened in the game because, you know, a lot of juniors would just cash in here and just go here and say, well, I won your queen. But that's a mistake, you know, because, yeah, you win f7 at the end, but black plays on. You know, the game continues. So queen h3 is a much better move, just keeping the pressure on. h6, queen h4, king d7. So here white had a brilliant win, which is like a computer engine win, which is not obvious at all. I mean, I wouldn't have played this move. You know, I'm not sure if I would have found what Bodhana played, which is also very strong. But actually, if you go back and move, also queen c3 looks strong, but maybe then when black... So white is threatening now queen a5 check. But the point is queen a5, you can always go like king e8 anyway, so it's not necessarily that strong. Queen h4 looks right, because you want to induce f6 is a weakening move, weakens the rook. So f6 you go queen h3 back maybe, or queen h5. Both very strong. I mean, the problem is you weaken the protection of that rook. So Mariya was very short time to king d7. Yeah, and the move was f4, but I think it's like an engine move. It's not obvious, and the idea is, say, just simply threaten to take on e5. Again, you can't really go f6 because of because you're weakening the protection of that rook on g6, and you're weakening the squares. You're weakening e6, so queen h3 becomes more powerful. And all these ideas like queen h3 are becoming more powerful because you played f4. And if you take on f4, I take out the queen, and I'm hitting f7. So there's not really anything black can do here. It's just completely dead lost. Again, but not obvious f4. Maybe rook e8 is a move that you would consider, but then But then queen h3 check, and then you haven't covered c8 anymore. If you go back to d8 and go rook c8 check. But f4 not obvious. Queen c4 more like a human way to win. And it's completely winning now for white because you're threatening rook c7. Black has just completely busted. And so I think there's more than one way to win. There's several ways to win here. Bodhana found one of the ways. I think queen h3 I would have played myself because it's just looked very obvious. Threatening queen e6. Followed by mate on f7. And if you go queen d5, I go queen d7, king f8, rook c8 with forced mate. Yeah, so that's just completely gone. But the way C found was also good. I don't know if he overlooked queen d3. I don't think he did, because he went rook g7, and that was the end of the game. You see a win, and you're like, you see one win. I'm not going to bother to look for another win. So it's a very impressive game by Bodhana. And see, he had quite a big time advantage at the end of the game as well. So he had like, you know, I think he had about 8 minutes plus increment, whereas his opponent was down to. So, you know, it's very impressive not only to outplay her opponent, but also to, you know, stay ahead of her on the clock, which I think is quite important. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he gets on in the coming rounds. I think, you know, C plays to win, doing very well. You know, the Lauren Da Costa team, so it's all-female team, you know, like Charlie's Angels, you know, Lauren's Angels or something like that. I think Alana was doing quite well in her game, or as when I last looked. So she was, but anyway, that was interesting. And I think Bodhana, I think, you know, she's probably, yeah, English chess has been in the doldrums for so long. I think in terms of, you know, we've had good players coming through. Don't get me wrong, but we haven't had great players coming through for many years, right? And now we've suddenly got a generation with Shreyas Royal and Bodhana and Supratir and Ethan Pang and players coming through who are actually quite exciting. You know, we don't know how strong they're going to be, and obviously that's happening not just in England. It's also happening with players like Faustina Oro, and obviously you've got these Turkish guys as well. You know, like Edra Gomez and Edis Gurel. But anyway, that was a very interesting game. Leave your comments down below. What do you think of that game? You know, big upset there in round one of European Club Cup. Be interested to see how Bodhana gets on after that amazing win. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe so this video can get promoted on the algorithm. Hoping for our first 100k views on one video. I know it's never going to happen. You know, I'll always be a small YouTuber.